So apparently everything we were hearing the other day about the U.S. possibly arming Ukraine with nukes was false. And it's pretty wild. My initial reaction is thank God, right? National Security Advisor Sullivan denies report that the Biden administration is thinking about giving Ukraine its nukes back. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum, agreeing to cede its nuclear weapons, which were part of the Soviets' broader arsenal, in exchange for security. Okay, so first off, they were never Ukraine's nukes, so we're not giving Ukraine nukes back. They ceded them over 30 years ago, like in 1991? So this whole, the framing of this whole headline is really weird, and it seems almost like it's designed to frame it as though Ukraine's always had nukes, and they temporarily got rid of them, and now we're just thinking about giving them back. It's just weird framing. I don't like that framing. Outgoing National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan denied reports that the Biden administration is considering returning nuclear weapons to Ukraine after the country relinquished its stockpile 3 decades ago after the fall of the Soviet Union. Exactly. Okay. Last month, the New York Times reported that several anonymous officials floated the idea of Ukraine becoming a nuclear power again as a deterrent against Russian invaders that are already there. Like, the whole eastern Crimea is taken. Like, more territory is taken now by Russia than they wanted in the first place out of the whole conflict because Ukraine keeps escalating it. And Russia is attempting to use this as a mechanism for de-escalation. Russia sees them as protecting themselves from Ukraine and the escalation of NATO by having more and more territorial control of the region, right? We were talking about this the other day regarding Israel, how Israel is surrounded by, just like Russia, Israel is surrounded by what they perceive to be their enemies, right? And so we're watching Israel react in ways that we consider to be rash, right? But we're not considering the mentality of an animal that's backed into a corner, okay? Russia is in that exact same position geopolitically, except with less friends. So Russia off bat is like, I'm the only one that's going to get my back. If I got to get my back, then I got to carve out all this extra space just to keep these people at arm's distance. You see what I'm saying? And so they see themselves as protecting themselves. Russia sees us as defense against NATO expansion. If that's wrong and incorrect, sure, but we have to operate on people from where they're coming from. If we don't address them where they're coming from and address their interests and their concerns, there's never going to be a constructive dialogue that allows for solutions. So for us to try to just paint Russia as a boogeyman and to paint Russia as on some evil hegemonic conquest is not doing us any service for finding a system that's going to de-escalate, save Ukrainian lives, and keep as much Ukrainian territory in sovereign hands as possible, okay? That is not under our consideration. No, Sullivan told ABC regarding those nukes this week on Sunday when asked about the report. What we are doing is surging various conventional capacities to Ukraine so they can effectively defend themselves and take the fight to the Russians, not nuclear capability. In 1994, shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum, agreeing to cede its nuclear weapons, which were part of the Soviets' broader arsenal, in exchange for security guarantees from Russia, the US, and the United Kingdom. Okay, this is okay, so there was an agreement, all right, that Ukraine entered an agreement that they would be protected by Western influences, right? But here's the thing. The U.S. and the West entered an agreement with Russia that they would not surround Russia on its borders by NATO, okay? So there's a very nuanced and delicate system at play here where we got to protect Ukraine while also not surrounding Russia by NATO and making them so scared. Dude, Russia asked to join NATO in the late 90s. Did you guys know that? Russia asked to join, not only that, not just once, multiple times. Later in the early 2000s, Russia has tried to join NATO and been rejected from NATO because what we talked about yesterday with the US breaking up the Soviet Union and the US banking system being involved in who gets chosen as Russian oligarchs to control industries, because in their mind, they were going to third world Russia, right? They were going to do what they had done with the banana republics in South America. They were going to do what they'd done in the Middle East East because Russia's rich in natural resources and huge. And so they were going to start privatizing those natural resources, giving them to international corporations, and then drawing money to the international community and just kicking some back to Russia. Russia caught wind of that. And then they backed off. So Russia dissolved, right? They were going to get broken up and they were going to start having their resources extracted by the international corporate system, right? And they realized that at the last second. And so they backed off and they started trying to operate more independently. Russia, in a lot of ways, operates similar to the CCP in China, where the government is a collection of mafias that have both corporate and criminal connections, right? And so in Russia, we see a lot of hostile takeovers between corporations that are actually played out with private militaries fighting each other with guns and each other, like literally taking over the buildings with military force, right? So Russia is a lot more of a nuanced situation and a lot less of a monolith than we make it out to be here in the U.S. And a lot of what's going on. So Ukraine was originally a part of Russia before the Soviet Union, right? During the Soviet Union, there were international elites that made their way into the power structure of the Soviet Union and started breaking up the Soviet Union into disparate federations. Because it would be easier to allow the area to autonomously manage itself and then answer to Russia, and then Russia kind of have more of a managerial standpoint to some of these regions, right? That was the argument at the time when they started splitting it up as a Soviet Union. In my opinion, that was the infiltration of the Soviet Union by corporate interest, ready to break it up to set the stage for what they were trying to get done in the 90s, right? Russia was a bad guy. Don't get me wrong. The Soviet Union was a bad guy. But so is every other player on the geopolitical stage. There are no good guys. So when you guys hear me talk about, these guys are bad guys, these guys are bad guys, I'm not defending nobody, okay? Every single person has bodies in their closet. Every single government has bodies in their closet, has gone and ruthlessly killed their own constituents. There is no innocent government. There is no good guys on the world stage. The U.S. used to have a U.S. Bureau of Censorship and internment camps in the U.S., and that's just one of our many Tuskegee experiments. Look, there's no good guys on the world stage, period, okay? So I'm not defending nobody. I'm just saying the situation is a lot more nuanced than you think it is. And what they're talking about here with protecting Ukraine was really about protecting their assets, okay? So they staged Ukraine during the Soviet Union to be split up, right? And then after the Soviet Union was split up, the whole goal was that southern Crimea portion with the Black Sea port and the oil reserves that are there, right? That was the whole main mission. And that's why there's been tension on it, because Ukraine, as an independent nation, I believe in like the late 90s or early 2000s, entered a treaty with Russia where Russia pays Ukraine for access to that area. And so Russia was starting to be able to maintain a foothold as a oil distributor to Europe, which had which was directly in contradiction with our interests in terms of energy distribution around the world, and completely had the potential to negate all of our efforts in the Middle East in terms of grabbing a foothold on that energy supply as an arm of the international banking conglomerate, right? And so that's why we're seeing all of this stuff play out in Russia, okay? I mean, in Ukraine, okay? National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan claimed that the administration is not considering arming Ukraine with nukes. AFP via Getty Images. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky wants the Donbass back. Notably, Ukraine was not believed to have the codes needed to operate the nuclear weapons. Interesting. So even when Ukraine was being broke up as a part of the Soviet Union and had those nukes on their territory, they were still Russian nukes. They didn't even have the codes to use them. So this whole narrative that we're just giving Ukraine its nukes back is completely false. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has groused over how his country has fared since the Budapest Memorandum, now that the Kremlin has invaded. Which of these major nuclear powers suffered? All of them? No, Ukraine did, Zelensky bemoaned in October at a European Council summit. Yeah, but you're not a nuclear power. Why don't you just be honest? Why don't you just be honest? See, this is what irritates me, bro, because I was talking about this yesterday with trying to look into Burisma Holdings and the corruption in Ukraine. The corruption in Ukraine goes so deep. Ukraine is a hotbed for a lot of white-collar crime. Let's put it that way. Who gave up nuclear weapons? All of them? No, Ukraine. Who is fighting today? Ukraine. Either Ukraine will have nuclear weapons and that will be our protection, or we should have some sort of alliance apart from NATO. Today, we do not have any effective alliances. Yeah, bro. But also, how about working out some sort of treaty? You guys never had to lose your territory if you didn't shut down that treaty with Russia and access to Crimea. I know that it was out of behest of the U.S. to get that done because the U.S. are the ones really with the national interest. Ukraine was benefiting from that. So the U.S. is the one really with the national interest there. But it's like, dude, they could renegotiate a better term. They could have profit sharing. Dude, this whole war is so unnecessary, dude. Sullivan stressed that President Biden is racing to do what he can for Ukraine before departing to the White House and President-elect Donald Trump takes office. Trump, 78, has made clear intentions of ending the bloody war unfolding in Ukraine, though he's been short on specifics about how he plans to achieve that objective. Trump has named retired Army General Keith Kellogg as special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. Kellogg has been supportive of Ukraine in the past and recently defended Biden's decisions to authorize Ukraine to fire ATACMS deep into Russian territory, a move that rattled some of Trump's allies. When asked about speculation that a second Trump administration would broker a deal in which Ukraine cedes territory to Russia, Sullivan was coy. Yeah, look, you know why people are upset? You know why people on the right are upset by Ukraine sending ATACMS into Russia? Because that's after rejecting 3 peace treaty offers by Russia. Russia invited Ukraine and the U.S. to go to the negotiation table 3 times now since the beginning of this war. We've rejected them every time, and each time we respond by escalating the conflict. The U.S. at this point, Ukraine is so dependent on us for military support, it essentially exists as a vassal state. I'm not saying whether it was or not before. Personally, my belief is that it was, so I just did. Whatever. But Ukraine is destroying their own country right now. There's almost nothing left of them, right? They are only pursuing this war as far as the U.S. is putting that fire under their ass to keep them going, right? The U.S. demands only to come to the negotiating table from a position of leverage. Right now, Russia has that position of leverage. And so the U.S. is going to reject, escalate, to try to push Russia into a position where it invokes a response, a bigger response from the rest of the international community. And it will only be willing to enter a negotiating table with Russia when it is clear that Russia is no longer in a position of strength, which is sad because our national interests are not the only thing that exists here. So do Ukrainian children, so do Ukrainian men, so do the generations of Ukrainians that are gone and wiped from the face of this earth, and all our elites are seeing all the money they can make off the backs of that. Dude, not only are our national interests not the only relevant variable in play, but secondly, we are putting our national interests at risk by engaging in this. We have one of the largest reservoirs of oil in the world that we can access through Alaska. Russia, if we allow Russia to renegotiate better terms with Ukraine, where Ukraine can benefit more from the oil distribution, right? Russia would not be pulling as much money from its oil sales as we would. It puts us on a great competitive standpoint. Sure, it makes oil prices on the global market cheaper, but how much money do you really need to stuff in your pocket to be okay at the end of the day, man? Come on, bro. The key thing from my perspective is that Ukraine determines its destiny, and its destiny is not imposed by outside powers, including the United States, Sullivan said. That is reassuring to see, because in reality, while he's being coy, maybe he's playing politics, maybe he's really vying for that confirmation, okay? But in reality, the U.S. and Western influences are the ones that are pushing Ukraine to do this. I do not believe there is any way that Ukraine wanted to start rounding up its citizens from the streets to send them to war forcibly, killing generations, entire portions of its population. It just has no benefit for Ukraine. I mean, even as corrupt as many of their elites are, there's no benefit to it. So I absolutely love that he's saying something like that instead of referencing some sort of emotional rhetoric regarding the international community and promoting values around the world, right? The key thing for this year was to try to give Ukraine as many tools as possible so that they could go into that negotiation and feel they could achieve the outcome they would like to see. Yeah, I was just saying that, right? I was just saying that. As far as territory or security or other elements, I'm not going to speak to that publicly, and that's smart. That's definitely smart. Good. Zelensky has previously demanded a return to Ukraine's 1991 borders, meaning it would regain control of Crimea and Donbass. However, recently he seemed to soften his tune. At some point, bro, you're not going to have any people left to populate your country, dog. So, I mean, what is it worth at the end of the day? Dude, you should have never cut the treaty. You should have never shut the treaty down, dude. What is wrong with you, man? Even like the U.S., to the U.S. elites that pushed Ukraine to do that. What were you thinking, bro? Why not renegotiate the treaty and pressure a renegotiation of the treaty that puts Russia in a more complicated position, but one just underneath of what would have a kinetic response from them. You see what I mean? You can make him squirm, you can make him uncomfortable, but you can keep it underneath what would result in a kinetic response, right? And in terms of U.S. national interests, that would be the best move, not this. Lockheed Martin and Boeing and our military contractors are not the country. They're not our entire GDP. Helping the U.S. is not just giving money to our military contracting corporations, man. That is what we need to do fast, and then Ukraine can get back the other part of its territory diplomatically. So exactly what I was saying, right? They want to put Ukraine in a position of negotiating strength, except that's not really possible right now without risking World War III. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance previously dangled a peace plan involving a special demilitarized zone between the two warring nations and Ukraine committing that it won't join NATO. That's an interesting compromise. Could we get Russia to agree to a demilitarized zone? Because we have effed Ukraine's position on the negotiating table up so much. We have weakened Ukraine from a negotiating standpoint so much through our incompetent influence that they've lost territory that they were making money off of before. We did that. We funded a coup in the Maidan revolutions in Ukraine. We did that. There was a call. I got a video out about it, guys. There's a call between our State Department and their State Department or officials between the two countries, literally talking about managing the outcome of the special election that they had gotten together, right? And dude, like that whole Maidan revolution, that whole system, the ousting of Yanukovych, that was a U.S. funded coup, and we did that because we wanted Russia to stop making all that money giving oil to Europe. But all we did was further entrench Russia's position as an oil distributor to Europe. Now Russia has developed an oil pipeline with Germany. We had to run over there and blow up using proxies. What were we thinking, dude? Like, bro, if this was a chess game, we played so bad, I would wonder if we have any experience at all, dude. Sullivan, whose wife is a Rep-elect Maggie Goodlander, Deef of New Hampshire, also briefly touched on the Israel-Hamas war and surmised that if Israel reaches a ceasefire, they can push for a broader diplomatic initiative in the region. We are determined to move rapidly to get those hostages home, get a ceasefire in place, and then move on to this larger deal that we would like to see consummated as soon as possible, including, if possible, while President Biden is still president, he said. Jake Sullivan denies the report that Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine. Thank God. What a reassuring piece. And we were talking yesterday, I was actually listening to, we were talking yesterday about Israel Hamas, right? And Gaza, right? But I was actually listening to this podcast that's really like Israel state media, right? And the interesting thing that you saw there, and they were very clearly against the ceasefire, right? Because Israel's scared as hell right now. And the interesting thing that you saw in that dialogue that I thought was really notable, right, was the only reason Israel apparently agreed to the ceasefire, and this is coming from basically their state media, was because the U.S. was withholding shipments of arms that Ukraine bought. that Israel bought from the U.S. Okay? Otherwise, Israel would have not agreed to the ceasefire because they were apparently eviscerating Hamas in southern Lebanon, right? And so clearly the position that Israel finds itself in, they see it as being worth it to have a level of collateral and civilian damage because they're so scared. I'm sorry, Israel, right? But at the end of the day, I don't agree with that. And I think it was a power move for the U.S. to hold those arms shipments. And I think it ended up being a good move. I'm excited. If they can use this ceasefire for a larger diplomatic deal in the region, absolutely I'm with it. I want to see less destabilization in the region. I want to see less funding of destabilization. I don't know who's doing it. It very well could be the U.S. funding this destabilization, and then they're claiming Iran does it. I don't know. I'm not in the know on that type of thing, but I know I want to see less of it. I know I want to see less private military corporations that are starting conflicts that get the rest of their country in danger. You know, I want to see less of that. So definitely, I'm liking what I'm seeing here. Really reassuring for the second one today, guys. We started the first one with kind of like the entrenched establishment, an example of how that kind of system and cycle continues. I thought it would be nice to have a little bit of good news for this one, guys. I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for joining me.